now would like to give the forum to our today's first speaker, and the first speaker is Professor Selim Raihan. So now, floor is yours. And regarding time, there is one frame I have outlined. To each speaker, we have allotted 15 minutes, and then 10 minutes to each today's panelist, and then 20 minutes I have allotted for questioning, answering. Obviously, we are trying to make it interactive. Today's our discussion, and then finally 5 minutes for sum up. So thank you. Now yours turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm really glad, and it's my pleasure to be here at the 10th South Asian Economic Summit. I'm going to make the presentation. Okay. Actually, I'll be trying to address the questions which were asked to me in the note. So it's unleashing the potential of interregional trade in South Asia. So what are the potential of interregional trade in South Asia? Actually, there are estimation of the sizes, different and using different models, using simple calculations, gravity modeling, CGE modeling, and they show that actually there are huge potentials. Actually, we are not really bluffing ourselves. There are potentials, and there are also some gains which can't be measured. Actually, we talked about peace dividends in the morning. I think these are something. There are huge potentials from interregional trade. And actually, there are studies. Actually, I just looked at the studies and the range of the gains. Actually, even it says that the interregional trade can be increased by 2 to 4 times from its current level in the near future. But if there are some conditions, okay, I will come back to that things later. But how do we explain the low interregional trade in South Asia? So in that context, the first question is how low is interregional trade in South Asia. So I'd like to present something here to you. So actually I did some calculation from 2006 and 2016, when 2006 was the onset of SAFTA and 2016 is the latest year. So actually I beg to differ with Dr. Pandey with the terms of number, what he presented yesterday. Actually I used the MacMap trade map database, and it shows that actually interregional trade in South Asia increased from 4.2% in 2006 to 5.5% in 2016. Actually, the table I'll be sharing with you, the presentation, it shows that when it comes to at the country level, the numbers are much bigger than 5%. And we know that in Nepal, Bhutan, and even Sri Lanka, they trade more at the more than 5% level. But interestingly, when you compare with the ASEAN during the same period, actually ASEAN's interregional trade declined from 24.7% to 22.8%. So that gives a bit of encouragement that, okay, we are not really extremely off track, something there and something we can really take forward for the future. But there are some areas of concerns. Actually, there are some huge areas of concerns. Especially look at India. India is actually importing less what India used to import before the onset of SAFTA. So the share of India's import in total interregional import, in terms of its total import, actually it was 0.8% in 2006. And it went down to 0.7% in 2016. So that means India proportionately is actually importing less from its neighboring countries. And if we consider India as the biggest market in South Asia, then that's a big concern. And there are also concerns for Bangladesh. You can see the export share has gone down, interregional export. And there are also shares for Maldives, Nepal, to some extent, though Nepal started with a very high. But I would really try to flag out the case of Pakistan. Saying as Pakistan is actually not importing much from the region. Actually, if you look at Bangladesh, increased import share from region, and that actually gave Bangladesh a kind of, I would say, that importing from the region is not necessarily bad if you can use this import in a useful way. I'll come back to this issue a bit later. But if we really decompose the rise in interregional trade between this period, actually during that period, we can see, I'll just come back to that point, that the incremental intra-regional trade was 6.7% of the incremental total trade in this region during that period, 2006-2016. And if we compare it with the ASEAN, interestingly, it is 19.5% in ASEAN during that same period. That means actually incremental base, we traded less, much lesser than what the ASEAN countries did. Now, if we look at the share of the incremental import during this period, Nepal and Bangladesh, these two countries, they accounted for 60% of the total import, incremental import during that period. And you can see Bangladesh is having the highest share, almost 1/3 of the total incremental import was done by Bangladesh, and then Nepal. I'd just like to figure the point here. The difference between Bangladesh and Nepal is that the point I tried to mention during the panel discussion, that Bangladesh is actually quite nicely used its import, in its export sector. So import from India was really kind of, and if we look at the composition of import of Bangladesh over the last 2 decades from the region, actually that composition changed quite drastically, and it was really favoring the export sector in Bangladesh. But if you compare Nepal and Bhutan import from India, it is still very much basic stuff, which did not really help much of their industrialization or other economic growth process. What happened? Sorry. Okay. Now if we look at the incremental export, India is dominating like anything. More than 86% is actually of the incremental export is done by India. So that's the kind of imbalance we can see. India is exporting quite a lot to the region, but importing less. But that story can be nicer, can be made nicer if the import from India can be used in a more productive way in the development process. And in the total trade, India's share was around 44%. Now, India is the biggest market attraction for South Asia, no doubt. But actually, the point I'd like to mention that Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, they're exporting very small proportion of their export capacity while exporting to Indian market. You can see that figure. Actually, Bangladesh is exporting only 1.5% of its export capacity to India, and same for Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Now, the point I'd really like to make about if I try to explain the low intraregional trade, actually the point I tried to make in the panel session, that the divergence of national economic development strategies in South Asia. So the point is that I really don't want to elaborate on that, but India and Bangladesh, we can see some convergence in their economic development strategy, more concentration on the manufacturing sector, export-oriented sector, which really help them to kind of converge and then kind of integrating more. But other countries, they are really go beyond, far beyond. And in that contrast, the Southeast Asia, we can see a convergence of national economic development strategies led to a deeper regional integration, and that aligned with China's development strategies. So what are the achievements of SAFTA? SAFTA Trade Liberation Scheme is incomplete, long sensitively, so I think we know all about that. India granted duty-free quota-free market access to LDCs, but it did not really help much yet. And Bangladesh and Nepal, they are maintaining a high, actually, sensitive list. Pakistan has not yet given MFN status to India, and the proliferation of non-tariff measures and non-tariff barriers, and the dispute settlement in the SAFTA never work. So what is the future of SAFTA in this context? And how to go to the next step? We always talk about getting into the customs union. But I would say that actually over the last few years, I have done some work in collaboration with some of the leading South Asian researchers. The point we are trying to make that actually it's not necessary that we have to get into the customs union. South Asian regional integration, deeper integration can take its own form. So it is actually, we are talking about common market, we are talking about some of the elements of economic union when we talk about investment integration, service integration. So it's not that we have to follow a very conventional path of regional integration. Role of India as a leader, I would say, hesitant, confused still. And the role of Pakistan is important, and Pakistan should award MFN status to India immediately to show the goodwill gesture. It is something you can't live with for long. And then the smaller countries, I know that actually that was also pointed out in the morning, that the fear of the smaller countries. But now when the dynamics of the trade and interregional trade has changed quite a lot, the smaller countries can be very powerful. Bhutan actually halted the BBI and motor vehicle agreement. The implementation of it. Bangladesh can really bargain its two ports, using its two ports, Chittagong and two ports, to give the access to northeastern India and be a big player in that BBI region. So I think that weaker country perspective need to be changed now. And then we need to rethink the whole regional integration process in South Asia, and we need some fresh initiative, and definitely India has to take the load. But the proliferation of non-tariff barriers, very briefly I talk about that when you talk about non-tariff barriers, we actually confuse with the non-tariff measures. And we need to actually demystify. And many of the non-tariff measures are actually legitimate. But when we see a lot of procedural obstacles associated with the non-tariff measures, they become actually barrier. And why is there proliferation of the non-tariff measures in South Asia? Growing concern with as the per capita income has increased, and India's agreement with many of the Southeast Asian countries, even with Korea, even with the European Union, what is now putting pressure on India to increase its standards. And then there is a global pressure as well, and regional infrastructure is not enough to handle the growing trade in South Asia. And that's why the land ports are extremely bad condition, and when it comes to, and since South Asia, more than 80% of the trade happens to land ports, and their infrastructure is extremely bad. And major NTMs, we found that SPS, TBD, countervailing duties, anti-dumping duties, and so and so. I would like to cite some of the examples, and the reason I'm saying Dr. Pandey is also, we are working together. We are doing a 6-country studies in South Asia, trying to look at what are the major non-tariff measures in the potential export products. And some of the findings, I'd just like to highlight. Bangladesh asked for a radioactivity test for the imports of food items from, or fruits from elsewhere. And actually Bhutan is struggling quite a lot to, fulfill that requirement. Bhutan doesn't have that lab to do that testing. You know what Bhutan does? Bhutan takes the sample to Mumbai, get that certificate from Mumbai, and then gets the entry permission to Bangladesh. It's funny. You can't do it in this way. How can you then increase the interregional trade? We also found that there's a much higher incidence of NTNs in India. Just one comparison. Bangladesh is one of the global leader of shrimp exports to European Union. When it comes to exports of frozen shrimp to European Union, we found that United Kingdom asked for 10 documents, SPS TBT, and only one authority actually is handling all these things. And when it comes to India, India asked for 41 SPS and TBT documents, and there are 6 different institutions working, no harmonization among them. So you can see the incidence of NTNs. Then we have the case of anti-dumping duty on jute goods of exports to India from Nepal and Bangladesh, countervailing duties on ready-made garments, port entry restriction in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is also, doing this as a kind of culprit on that, and there are different procedural obstacles at land ports. So how effective we have been in addressing the NTBs in South Asia? SAFTA, there is no timeline. If we look at the SAFTA agreement, there is no timeline for NTNs, how we address these NTNs. SARSO, they actually came to an agreement on setting the standards for 6 products, but when I talked to the SARSO, I found that actually these have been ratified by the countries, and very slow progress, lack of interest from the participating countries. There is a need for memorandum of understanding MU between the standard organizations. There are some good ray of hopes where the BIS from India actually have an MOU with BSTI, and also they allowed 21 products from Bangladesh to get into India with the BSTI certificate. But again, still a long way to go, and there is a need to actually progress towards a mutual recognition agreement. But we should not forget that when you talk about non-tariff measures and non-tariff barriers, it's not only the blame game. A major part of it actually lies with our own capacity, lack of our capacity. The supply side capacity, especially the exporters, they don't know what should be the production process to meet the standards, the non-acceptance of the certificates issued by the standard authorities. And I also found that there's a cost to meet the standards that can also work as a disincentive to the exporters. And in that case, government has to come out to support the exporters, giving them some kind of incentives. And then definitely there is no other way but to develop the quality infrastructure and areas of regional cooperation. As I said, Bhutan doesn't really need to take that sample to Mumbai. If there could one testing lab could be set up nearby, even in India, nearby, not too that far, that could really facilitate export of orange and apple from Bhutan to Bangladesh. Now, what can be done? I just want to conclude with 2 issues. I don't really want to have a very long wish list. But I thought that definitely we need to actually energize the process of convergence of national economic development strategy in South Asia. The way the development strategies, the development plans, or development programs in different South Asian countries are happening, no way they are converging. They are very divergent, and no way, even if I put the SDGs in the context, take the example of one of the SDGs which talks about doubling the manufacturing share of GDP by 2030. What is Nepal? What is Nepal doing? What is even Sri Lanka and other countries doing? In a research study, what I found is actually there is a process of deindustrialization, premature deindustrialization in South Asia, and only Bangladesh is the exception, interestingly. So we need to actually get our policies, the national policies right. Otherwise, if we just have this regional forum like this, and we start blaming each other, no way we can integrate. And finally, and this again, I would like to mention that because I think that whole discussion on the regional integration issue actually should be based on from the political economy perspective. What I thought that we need to create enough regional political capital to have to generate the interest for regional integration in South Asia. The way I mean the regional political capital is that when you have the political elites in the region, they agree on that, and they also get a huge support from the non-elites too. That can really create the capital, regional political capital for the regional integration. And in that case, I would just, since when I'm saying it's a capital, that means it has a flow and it has a stock too. So actually, in many years, we found that there were some positive flows. So we had a bit of stock of aspiration or stock of regional political capital for deeper regional integration in South Asia. Probably that resulted in a signing of SAFTA in 2006. But probably since then, we are having a negative flow, and the stock is depleting like anything, and we need to get it back to the kind of a critical level. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Raihan.